there! You're listening to Sun Sister Podcast. This podcast is following my Interrail trip across Europe during the spring of 2023. For 3 months, I interviewed women I met along the road to talk about their personal stories and women's rights in their country. Today, you'll be listening to Christina from the United States. She lived in France for a while because she was teaching English at university in Lyon. I met her while looking for someone to rent my room when traveling for 3 months. So this episode is pretty special because she was my very first interviewee. We recorded this in April 2023 in my apartment just before I started the trip. She is the kindest first guest I could dream of and a very joyful human being. In this episode, we talked about abortion, non-binary people rights, and football clubs in Lyon. Enjoy! Alright, recording. Good afternoon, Christina. Welcome to this podcast. So this is a new podcast dedicated to gender equality and feminism around the world. So I'm Laurie and I'm with Christina, who will be my first interviewee ever. So I'm super excited. I met Christina at my apartment in Lyon because I'm subrenting my room to her for the next 3 months. And well, Christina is a teacher, an English teacher at university. So I guess we can start. My first question would be what is your inner weather today?
Okay. Thanks, Laurie, for having me on this podcast. This is such a cool opportunity, and I love discussing this, especially amongst different cultures and internationally. So this is an especially cool type of podcast to have. And what an interesting starter question. For an inner weather, how I'm feeling in terms of inner weather, I would say sunny. It's sunny outside right. With perfect, the only way I can describe it is Toy Story blue sky with the fluffy clouds. And I think outside weather affects my mood quite a bit, actually. So perfect kind of day to go for a run and then kind of be lazy in the apartment on this lazy Saturday. So just happy and sunshiny.
Amazing. What an amazing description. So you were born and raised in the US, state of New York, I believe. Could you please tell us what is your life story? To introduce you a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up with my mom, my dad, and my brother. And we lived in a really small town in upstate New York, so a bit far from New York City, but I'm still a New Yorker, if I can say that. Yeah. And I lived in this small town for all of my adolescence, where I was really involved in the school activities, so be it music or sports, a little bit of theater, but not so much. I'm not so skilled in that area.
I doubt that.
And after that, I went to an even smaller town, also in upstate New York, for my bachelor's degree. During that time, I studied languages and was able to take a semester to study abroad in France, which was an amazing opportunity, which only encouraged me to go there for a gap year after I finished my bachelor's degree. So after that gap year, which was abruptly interrupted and ended due to COVID, I was repatriated back home. I kind of explored different work areas in the US. So I moved to Richmond, Virginia, which is a bit in the south, about 8 hours south of where I had grown up. And I was again in a city after being in Lyon. So I went from that really small town to kind of bigger city areas and absolutely fell in love with both of these cities. Although having said that, the moment that I could get back to France, I did, which is how I was able to meet you.
Amazing. You're almost French now. You spend so much time in France. What makes you vibrate in your everyday life?
I would say I get a lot of energy from other people. So it's really important to me to be surrounded by people who are ambitious and who just see the best in life. And maybe they're critical, but always take things and go with the flow and let the wind kind of blow them in whichever direction, and who really are compassionate for other people, and that just seems to be contagious and rub off on me. And so I get that energy from other people as well as from kind of exploring my own hobbies, which are mostly sports and traveling.
True. Yeah, you're running a lot. I gotta say. So now, focusing on your country of origin, so the US, we know that as of 2022, the World Economic Forum ranks the United States 27th in terms of gender equality. So 27th out of 149 countries. So it is further away than France, which surprised me, who ranked 15th. So how would you describe the situation for women and gender minorities in the US?
I think that's such a strong question. So I do believe the US is somewhat making progress in the right direction, definitely not as quickly as I would like or as many other people would like. I think that a lot of the efforts that are publicized are very small efforts that we consider to be big gains, but when you look at the big picture, actually, the fundamentals of equality are not necessarily being met. And so the overturn of Roe versus Wade was a huge upset for a lot of people, and really was difficult because I think a lot of people, even though we were getting these small wins of really small things like gender neutral bathrooms, for example, it just showed how much the collective mentality of the US was not necessarily supportive of these small wins, and it was such a step back that I think it was a rude awakening for people that kind of let us know we needed to make more efforts to yes, we need to celebrate the small things, but we also need to dig to the core and start publicizing more what the actual problems are, instead of the things that we, as Americans, often we like to see the best in things. I hear that all the time in France that, so are you one of those cheerleaders? Like, are you actually happy all the time? Or is it just like a toxic positivity? And I don't think it was until I came to France, actually, that I realized, like, oh, actually, that is quite toxic, yeah, yes. To only see the best. And because it truly does cover up all of the wrong that's happening. And if you're not being implicit, or if you're not being directly impacted, sometimes it's easy to overlook some of the grander problems that are happening. And so I think actually since coming to France, I've been really able to see some of the not so great things that are happening at home. And the Roe versus Wade overturn was, when I'm in France and being a bit more critical of the situation at home, is not as shocking as when I was there and heard about it. But it's true that I would consider myself an ally, but I'm not on the front lines of some of these movements. And so I kind of, I'm informed by my friends in the LGBTQ communities or other people who are more involved in these projects. And so I get to hear more what they're doing locally, but I'm not as informed about what's happening globally in the US. And so when that happened, I was just so shocked. But taking a step back, being here in France and like kind of seeing what's happening here in France and hearing different perspectives about the US and then looking at it from abroad, I'm like, oh yeah, actually that kind of is on par where the US is.
So you were in France when this happened, or you were in the US?
I was still in the US, yeah.
In the US, okay. And did something happen? Like people went on the street, or? Yeah,
that definitely happened. So there were protests. And then I think that there was a lot of more virtual protests too. So you would see it obviously all over social media, and a lot of people who may not have been as open or ready to share their own personal stories were very vocal about things that had happened to them, and especially currently things that were happening at the moment. And just, it was just very shocking, I guess, to see and to hear some of the stories, and also just kind of, in a way, it did unify a lot of people, and that I never would have expected this from certain people. And I don't know, I think it always is very illuminating when you, like, people you know quite well, neighbors, friends, family, and you're like, oh, I had no idea this happened to you, and I wish I could have supported you in that moment, and I hope that I was supportive just by being your friend, but if I had known, maybe I would have, I don't know, try to do something differently. And so it's just always shocking, I guess, that happens in any situation like this, where you're like, wow, people are warriors.
Yes, definitely. I remember like seeing women from living like on the borders of some states that were like okay, like for abortion, and they were saying, okay, you can come to visit me like for a holiday, and then like those girls and women could access like the abortive pills. So do you experience gender inequality in your everyday life, or not so much?
So I think this goes back to the American toxic positivity, where I'm kind of fed the idea that yes, amazing, you're getting equal pay and things, but I think It really depends. If I think about my day-to-day personal life, I think there are certainly inequalities. Luckily, in my profession as a teacher, the government kind of regulates what the pay scale looks like, so it's based on experience. Right. So I'm very lucky in my career in that regard. But in terms of personal life, I guess it's the experience of a woman or a non-binary person where, you know, you're looking over your shoulders at all times, and you don't really realize that that's not a natural response and not a natural way of living until you have conversations with guys who are like, why don't you just do this? Or who cares if you just go move your car so you don't get a parking ticket? What's the problem if you go out at 2 a.m. to move it so that it's gone before the tow trucks come at 5? And it's like, I'm not going out in the middle of this city, or especially this part at 2 a.m. So there's just things that you're aware of and you're just being precautious of, whereas other people don't really have to worry about them. And so I'm lucky in the sense that I'm privileged in several different ways. And so there are a lot of things that I don't have to worry about and that I don't even know that I'm not worrying about. But I think, like I said, there's always that hierarchy and that and that stratification.
Definitely. Oh, definitely. Do you remember the first time you experienced gender inequality? Like, was there something when you were young when you were like, okay, I'm a girl, I know that?
Actually, so it's a silly example, I think. It was just...
Nothing is silly.
No, in my head, like in the grand scheme of things, there are significant differences that people, or challenges that people face. But when I was younger, I loved sports. I grew up with all of my cousins and my brother, who are all guys. And so I was lucky to have such a close-knit family. And so one of the things that we would do in the backyard is we'd play soccer or football and just, typically boy things, so to speak. But yes. I absolutely loved them. I just loved being athletic with them and being active. And so one of the things that I enjoyed was football, American football. And when you are in third grade, which is elementary school, you can start playing organized sports, be it the ones that were offered at our school were swimming, soccer, and American football. And for American football, I'm like, oh yeah, like maybe I'd like to try. And actually, I know that there was another girl who was on the team, but actually, I think she did make it all the way through high school. Like, I have no idea how. Most amazing, courageous woman. Like, I don't know how she did it with all of the different regulations and things like that. She really fought for it, and so it was cool in that regard. But I think it was heavily discouraged when I wanted to do it, both by teachers and coaches and my family. And so just a very, very simple example, but it was kind of that moment where like, okay, everything is not for me. Like there are places where I can be and places where it's just not my place to be. And I think at that moment it was kind of like I wanted to I became a lot more self-aware where I didn't want to intrude in spaces I wasn't welcome and do the, barge through and whatever it was. Yeah. And so it was in third grade where I don't know if it's where the anxiety started, but I just suddenly became just more aware, I suppose, that, yeah, you're a girl and that's what this means. But it's actually funny, going along the same lines of the girl sport, boy sport, I think that despite the Olympique Lyonnais in France, the women's team is like absolutely phenomenal. One of the best women's teams like in the entire league and all of Europe even. And having said that, there are a lot of adult clubs that you can join as a man, but I've looked all over Lyon and I have not found a adult women's club for non-professionals. I think that there might be one in Saint-Priest that you can go to, but I have looked everywhere, and so because of that, it was cool. I got into like rock climbing, and I did a little bit of CrossFit, and I've been running a lot more. But I have my cleats with me, my soccer ball, it's in the room, brought it all the way from the US.
Yes.
And no, I have no use for it because there are lots of fields you can play with. So you can do like pickup games amongst friends, but the organized team sport that I was looking for, I couldn't find here. And it was funny because I would talk to people too, and they'd be like, "Oh, Olympique Lyonnais, they're amazing." I'm like, "Yes, they're professionals. I'm here for a beer league. Like, you get to know people, you kick the soccer ball around, and you hang out afterwards. I'm not really here to win championships. I'm not quite that level, guys."
What the fuck? Yeah, I never thought of it. It's it's pretty sad.
I was sad. Yeah,
yeah. Maybe create your own. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
What could improve the lives of US women or US gender minorities people? Do you know? Do you have some ideas maybe?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, and I feel like it's so multifaceted that it kind of takes different forms, so it kind of depends which approach you're taking. Yes. And so if you want to talk about like pay equality, or if you want to just talk about human rights in general, there's lots of approaches you could take. I think for now, so for example, for non-binary people, it is a tremendous hassle in the school system to be recognized as the gender you identify with. And I have had 2 students. One of them was able to get the correct documentation and like has the right to use the bathroom of the gender they identify with. But when I think about it, for example, when there is a substitute, that change happened during the year and they never changed their name on the roster, so it was their former name. And I think that student even got called into the office, and he basically just explained what had happened. And so the fact that the student had fought for this and was still having to explain for the remainder of the year was just, in my eyes, completely unacceptable. And so just, it sounds so simple, but just the basic human decency of I think it's such a day-to-day level of people just making the effort to include everybody in the way that they want to be included, in the way they want to be viewed. And like, that's just, again, super simple on the basis of respecting people and not making them feel marginalized, which actually is very different than including them. It's just simply not making them feel terrible about themselves. So that would be the most basic. And then after that, like I said, there's the huge pay discrimination. There's like I said, there's safety problems. When you look at the rate of suicides, for example, it's completely disproportionate. When you look at the sexual abuse, assault, things of those, completely disproportionate for women and non-binary people. And so like, it's high for everyone. That's not to say that the men don't experience this too, but when you look at the stats for these different groups, it is largely disproportionate for women and LGBTQ plus people. And so I don't know, I guess that's where I lack the words, is I don't really even know what the next steps would be. And so I think what I do is just in my day-to-day, I try again just to make people feel welcome and, I don't know, the bright, sunny, sunshiny, welcome, happy energy. But in terms of what legal processes would need to go through, or what the next steps would be to actually enforce the pay equality, to enforce that people can, use whichever bathroom they like. It's something so simple, but it's such a huge problem.
I was wondering, what is your own personal definition of feminism? No pressure, like really.
Oh yeah,
I don't even know myself. So.
No, it's actually funny you say that. We talked a little bit about this before the podcast. Just that I don't know if everyone feels this way, but in the US there's definitely a pressure to be politically correct all the time, and oftentimes the terminologies change all the time, and it needs to. Like, it's a very fluid movement, and I mean, gender's fluid. It makes sense that all the terms would be fluid, but there's definitely a pressure to get it right. In terms of feminism, I think for me it's just maybe simple, and I'm definitely not really talking about all of the different facets of feminism and like what needs to be focused on. But for me, it's just having the right and feeling at ease with myself and getting just to be myself all the time. And I think that extends to literally any person. Even if you do identify as a cis man, I think it's just the idea that everyone has the basic fundamental right to be able to live as they want to live. And how we get there is the problem, that not necessarily the problem, but what I'm not as versed in, and where does that discrimination come from, or how do we get to the equality, and how do we prevent these disproportionate tragedies from happening. But at the end of the day, everyone just wants to feel like they belong, and most of the time, like I said, I'm privileged in several ways, that I'm white, economically, financially, I'm like right in the middle. So it's not that I feel marginalized really at any point. In fact, for example, like I'm living abroad, like that just shows you that I feel like I'm accepted almost anywhere, enough where I have the confidence and I'm not afraid to go to these other places. And so for me, I'm lucky in that regards. I feel like feminism's boosted me up. I do feel myself. I feel exactly how I identify and how others see my identity. I mean, that's different from saying how they see my personality, of course, but they see me as the cis woman that I am. And so just feeling good in your skin and like you belong in spaces and you don't feel like you are imposing yourself in a place that you're not welcome, or also that your presence is making other people uncomfortable.
That's an amazing definition.
Oh, thank you.
And you're so right. Like also, it also includes making sure that everyone is being welcome, and that we try to like include everyone. You talked about including also cis men. Yes, I agree on that too. Maybe like it would be like a different kind of fight for them, but they could be good ally. It's in the. I mean, at the end of the day, like feminism is good for everyone. Also for like trying to fight toxic masculinity. For everyone. So I love the definition. Going from this question to the next one, I thought about this big thing. Do you consider yourself a feminist?
Yeah, absolutely.
You kind of answered this already.
No, yeah, absolutely. Just the experiences that I've had, my friends have had, I realize why it's so important, and also like kind of having my own idea of what feminism is, and that's just that everyone deserves to feel like they belong. And I think that's so important. I mean, I'm a teacher. I used to teach middle schoolers, like at such an age where no one really knows where they belong, like even in their own body, like, do I like this, or am I just doing it because my friends are doing it? So like discovering where you belong, I'm surrounded by that all the time, a little bit less now that I'm at the university. But yeah, just knowing that's so important to me. Of course, I identify as feminist.
So is there like some ways you express your feminism?
No, yeah, it's actually great. So when there are lectures, for example, or when students, especially I know a lot of my students have done projects like this, and actually this is not the first interview I've done on this topic. Some of my university students asked me about it, and I was like, I'm so proud of you. And they even did it with me in English, which was super sweet because they're my students learning English, and so like just that they made that effort to make me feel like I belonged, like it was perfect, went right along with it. Also, my French is terrible, so it was probably best that it was in English. But so I try to participate where I can, just to be supportive, even if it's not something that I'm actively looking for opportunities to express my feminism. And there are definitely different pockets, especially those in the university. You see a lot of like domestic violence and lectures about that, or events about that. So I especially try to work with those groups to kind of be supportive there. But I think mostly I would do it at the age of middle school. I have like this really kind of unappreciated power where people are really unsure of their identities or discovering their identities, and just I try to be a positive role model, more or less, and just to be completely myself and kind of show people, these young students, I suppose, that that's an acceptable thing to be. And when people are not tolerant of their presence, just to find peace in letting it go. I think that's so hard. It goes back to that American cheerleader, toxic positivity. I think it's a problem anywhere where it's hard to let go of friendship. It's hard to distance yourself, especially when you're a child and don't always have the power to kind of distance yourself from family if that's not good, or even from your teachers. And so being able to build those boundaries to kind of protect yourself and your inner peace is important, but also kind of showing students how to do it, because especially at that age, everything they say might be well-intentioned to another student. Sometimes it doesn't always communicate as well as they would like it to. And so just also being there to kind of intervene and be like, okay, like I see what's happening here, and just explaining both sides of the stories to really passionate students in the moment. And then kind of give an example for how the exchange could have gone a bit differently. And it's actually super amazing because you might not think that these little moments count, because normally that don't even happen in your classroom. It might be on the soccer field.
Yes.
I used to coach soccer, so it might be there, or it might be even in the hallway, or like might be people who aren't even your students. Like you're just passing in the hallway during your planning period, and you'll see like two students like absolutely butting heads, angry at each other, and you're like, okay, back up, what's happening? And so it's amazing though, because all these little moments kind of come back to your classroom, and by the end of the year, you just see such a change in the way that people treat each other. And you wouldn't think that it would matter, but it like changes the entire classroom like environment. And so it goes from being like a very professional setting to one where people like, and students like crying at the end of the year, they were so sad like to leave. And it's just really important, because it made me so happy to know that like literally all the students did feel like they belonged in the classroom. And I guess the way that I show feminism is just like trying to be the sunshiny, happy self, just making people feel welcome, I guess is my answer.
And this is beautiful. I mean, this is perfect. I believe sometimes like I would say like soft power like this is even more important, because it's in your daily life, and sometimes you don't need like to belong to 10 associations and like go on fights on the streets, because it might trigger you also. So and there is so much to do at this age, as we said, so it must be so like beautiful to see how your students improve. And wow, like it's
actually
moving.
like I didn't know how I felt about the job, but it's something that's so precious to me now. Just it has its difficult moments, but when it's kind of like that type 2 fun, I don't know if you've ever heard that, is where it's hard in the moment, it's stressful, nothing is happening the way you want it to go, but when you look back on the year, you're like, oh, I miss these students, I hope they're doing well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't knew that, but okay, I love that. Yeah, sometimes as a teacher you must hate this moment, but then you're like, okay, something improved. So
yeah, when you look at the grand scheme of things, 7th grade French might not be the most important thing that they ever have to go. So it goes back to the whole idea of like, how do you show feminism and how you feel belonging? Like, they're not going to remember the French and the conjugations or the gender of the nouns, but they're going to remember like, oh yeah, remember that one time? Like, it's just, you want them to feel happy and like they belong, and hopefully they can take how they felt in that classroom and like to other classrooms in the future. That's my bigger goal rather than the French, because I realize that most people are not going to continue French after their mandated year.
Oh no, this is sad. But I agree with them. Like, French is so hard, honestly. Like, but well, this is so brave. Like, it's so important, and congratulations on this. I think like the impact you have on your students. I remember like some of my professors are still having good impact. Like, you remember that, so that's beautiful way to show your feminism. All right, so our last question for this part, is there like feminist author or theory or book that blew your minds?
Yeah, so there was this one, it was a bit more like intersectional feminism or intersectionality by Angie Thomas, and I forget what the title of the book was. I think most of her books take on this perspective, but it was about a shooting, and I cannot remember what the name was, but basically about how the girl kind of just has to live with her friends who obviously were murdered, and just the shock that brought to her own life and to the community, and how like it doesn't end there. Like, you might think, oh, that's sad, these people will move on from it, but it doesn't. It actually creates these other problems, and just kind of bringing light to an area that I don't have any experience with this, thankfully, and that's another way that I'm privileged, but also another reason like why that book was so important, to show the world like the things that are happening, and why again equality like is lacking everywhere. We can say that USA, we have the Statue of Liberty, and we're accepting of all cultures, and we're the melting pot, and actually when you think about it, the melting pot is like the opposite of appreciating cultures. Like, you're just molding everyone down into this gray goop of American, I suppose, I don't know, but just it's a community that I don't have that much interaction with, because I don't, the schools I work with are private sometimes. I've worked in several different schools, but most recently I was in a private school. And yeah, so I don't often work with students from this demographic background, and that was just kind of mind-blowing. And I think the main character was a girl. Actually, I read it a long time ago. I could be completely mistaken. But it was just amazing to me because I think that that same idea was also shown in the series 13 Reasons Why, where like there was that main event, but they backed up and kind of showed different things that happened leading up to it, but then all the problems that came after the main event. So when you see this on the news, you're like, oh, how sad, another shooting, and it's like, you know, one of 100 in the US this year, whatever the crazy statistic is. Yes. It's not over. Like, it's not just the grief that the families and the school and the students are feeling. That problem then incites several others, and I don't think that is as known. And so that book just kind of opened my eyes to the idea that, you know, it's not those 5 seconds on the news that you're like, okay, yeah, this happened again. That's really sad. Hopefully they get over it soon. Like, it's, you know, the grief that will last forever, but in addition, all of the problems that ensue.
Yeah, this is so important. This book looks, this author looks amazing. You said Annie? No.
It was Angie Thomas. And she writes a lot of books. That was just the one that I had read a couple years ago. And then there's a couple in French that I read as well. So I'm a big fan of Marie Cardinal, and also Annie Ernaux, of course. So like, she does a really great job. And then who was the last one? I also like May Sabé. Those are my 3 feminist authors, I suppose. But and I think it's interesting too that we consider them feminists, and oftentimes like I feel like every author I just listed is a woman, and so like I feel like anything a woman writes in this world is feminist just by default because of the inequality. So it's kind of interesting, but they do actually touch on like women issues in the perspective of growing up in a world with inequalities. But actually, that was just kind of funny. I'm like, oh yes, all these women. Men probably write on it too. It's just that I have only read women's works.
So interesting. Thank you for sharing this. And I just wanted to go back when you said that the melting pot was it was actually just trying to put together like different people without really trying to integrate everyone. And this is so interesting. Like, I never thought about the American melting pot like this. And this is so interesting, actually.
I think that's because the U.S. doesn't want you to think of it that way. It's that toxic positivity. It's like, we're doing this terrible thing. Forget your culture. You're just going to be American now. Wear your stripes, put on your stars, and only speak English. Because if you speak anything else, we won't understand you. And we're only going to require people to speak 1 or 2 years of another language in school. And I don't know, there's just a lot of ways where it's kind of America or nothing. And so the statistic you told me at the beginning about how we were, I think it was 27.
Yes.
This is just for feminism, but I think overall, like, people always say like, oh, you know, the U.S. has a lot of room for improvement. But if you look like on the charts, like, they're never number 1. But in like as an American, I'm always like, USA, USA. And so like that's more of a joke. But actually, like, I do think of us as like the powerhouse and like a really strong country, which we are. That's true. However, the idea that we're the best at everything is definitely not the case now, and I don't know if it ever really was the case. Maybe in some regards for a fleeting moment, but there are a lot of ways and that we're not, and there's a lot of room for improvement. And that's those initiatives to improve on these areas are not always changing, or there's no effort really being made. And I don't know, it's just kind of interesting, yeah. But
guys, it's so interesting.
Yeah,
really, like I agree on this. Like, sometimes maybe we think that, like, wow, the US dream and everything, but it's for sure not so easy, and we see this with everything that's happening. Also in France, I don't want to put down the US. There's so many amazing stuff also.
It's true. Like, I'm not hating on my country. There's a lot of things that I appreciate about it. You know, I grew up there. You know, I'll always love my country. But I'm aware there are things that could be done better.
Yes. And thank you for sharing this. So we're going toward the end. Yeah. So on a more personal part, after all of our discussion, would you say that you are well surrounded in your life?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think that kind of, again, comes with experience and kind of just getting older and realizing what you find important and making sure that you are being supported by people. And I think that's actually a skill that we're definitely not taught. In school, you're taught to always smile to everyone. And that's a culture shock even for me. Like if I'm running, for example, I always smile at people or if there's a car coming, I'll wave at them. And people look at me like, do I know you? Like, are you a stranger or something like that? And like, I've seen people like pull their child closer to them because like there's a stranger smiling at them. Like, I promise that was not the intention. I'm just trying to be friendly. But like, we're taught to be nice to everyone and that everyone should be your friend. But at the end of the day, like everyone should not be your friend. Like you should pick people who support you and like make you a better person. And also being friends with everyone can be quite dangerous too. Like you don't really know people's backgrounds and things like that. And so then trying to always be nice and not saying, actually, that makes me uncomfortable, creates a lot of different problems. And I think, at least with my experience, that's a skill that has taken me a lot of years to at least know that I need to change it. I wouldn't say that I'm really perfect at doing it right now. There's still a lot of room for improvement in terms of setting boundaries for myself. But definitely something that as an adult I've kind of woken up to the idea where like I don't have to be friends with everyone. I can only spend time with people that make me happy. And that's a new idea and one that I'm trying to embrace a little bit more. But I think for now I would say everyone in my life is quite supportive.
That's amazing. I'm so glad to hear that.
Thank you.
But you're so right. We've been told, and I think even more as girls, maybe that we have to please everyone and you have to be nice to everyone and everything. And I think even more in the US, you have to smile to people because, yes, in France, smiling in big cities, it can be seen like super weird. And this is so sad, like really makes me so sad. But maybe it's changing a bit with younger generations, I don't know. But yes, and it's amazing that you have to take, like, it took you years like to realize, you don't have to be friends with anybody. And that's amazing that now you're working on this. And I think I went through this also, and also probably still working on this. But yes, thank you for sharing this.
No, for sure.
Is there someone that inspires you a lot in your surroundings or in your someone you don't know directly?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I would say that my friends actually inspire me the most. Then again, like I've just been really lucky with the people that I surround myself with, or that it's more coincidental. Like it happened to run into them and they've kind of become part of my entourage, so to speak. My family too, but yeah, I think there's something to be said for like the little wins. And people kind of make fun of me and they're like, oh yes, well I know you studied French, but you definitely see la vie en rose, like you definitely see everything through the rose colored glasses. And but yeah, I think that the little wins, like the day-to-day ones, are so underappreciated, especially in American culture. And I think that's one of the reasons like why it's really nice for me every so often to take these breaks and go abroad, because in France, there's this culture of separation between personal life and professional life. Yes. And people can take time. And for example, if you're going out with friends and you are 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours late, they're like, yeah, okay, just come when you can. And it goes back to that sense of belonging. Like, there's not that pressure all the time. And so like that's a little win. The win here was that you got to feel comfortable, and when you were ready, you went out with your friends. Whereas in the US, like if you're not 5 minutes early, you're late, you know? And so like the start time is kind of like suggested time, but everyone knows you get there like 5 minutes early so that you could start like on the dot. And and so I think just the little things like, oh yeah, like I went for a run this morning. Like it sounds super silly because I run quite a lot, but I have to hype myself up every single day to do it. And so it's these little things where it's like, you know what, yeah, maybe I'll put on makeup today, or maybe I'll cook instead of eat something simple. Like that sounds so basic, but
so
these
important.
little wins, like oh my god, like I accidentally crossed a stop sign and I didn't get caught by the cops. Like you shouldn't be doing that. But like sometimes
are you encouraging this?
Not at all. I don't know why it's in my head. It's something that happened like actually a long time ago, and there was like a cop sitting right there, and I was like, the universe is looking out for me today, and now I need to make sure that I don't do that again, because that was so anxiety inducing.
Wow.
And so okay, this is like took a turn. I don't know why.
I love the turn.
Anyway, long story short, it's the people who find their passion and like actually chase it. So for example, even you, like the fact that you have thought of this podcast and within just a couple of weeks you're like, yeah, I'm going to get the microphone and I'm going to go travel for 3 months and like interview people. Like that is so inspiring to me. I'm like, yeah, like Christina, just go travel, go do what you want to do. And then you had friends too that I got to meet who are doing exactly the same thing. And so when you see that it's possible with people who are in your groups, it really makes me feel like things are possible.
If you could say something to your past 10 years olds, what would it be? So it kind of drew on the inner child.
Yeah. So actually, I guess what I didn't mention before is when I was young, so I have generalized anxiety disorder, which I think people can, right now there's a big, maybe not movement, but there's more awareness being brought. And so I think a lot of people, this disorder is kind of almost shadowed by the fact that so many people are like, oh yes, I feel like just whatever it is and all these things. But basically just means like that you're on edge all the time. So it's not that I don't have panic attacks like some people, or there's different kinds of anxiety that maybe are triggered by different things. Mine is just like an underlying like buzzing sound, which makes sense to probably why I like sports, to kind of get some of that buzz and energy out. And so as a child, that actually wasn't diagnosed with that until my late college years. So there was a lot of like weird symptoms. For example, when my brother was born, I would like twist my hair. And if ever you're in the apartment when I'm doing homework, you might even see it. I'll like twist my hair.
I think I saw that.
And actually, when he was born, I would do it so much that I ripped all the hair out of my head, and I had to get a boy haircut. And it was like I don't mean boy, but it was super short. It was just like all my cousins. And so I was often mistaken as like one of my boy cousins, because also I was always wearing like clothes that I'd been playing in or playing soccer, and so I would call it like my boy haircut. And so like that was like a weird sense of like that added more anxiety. Or when I was younger, I had this thing where one of your habits is like you learn to brush your teeth when you leave the house.
Yes.
Normally not a problem. When you're in college at the universities in the US, you often live on in a dorm.
Yes.
And so you can just go back to your dorm room after your class and go back and forth. So when you have 4 classes, for example, in a day, you leave your room quite a bit. Yes. And so after my first semester of college, I came back and I had 6 like cavities in my teeth because I had brushed off all the enamel because I had left my room so many times.
Oh my God.
So it was just like little things like this
to
just like kind of give you a base. So when I was younger, that was not checked. So when I kind of got into the organized sports where it wasn't just playing in the backyard for fun with friends anymore, it was like 5 days a week, 2 hours every day, like with the competitions, like it was perfect for me. But I had this like tunnel vision drive where I could really only see the goals that were right in front of me. And so I was a good student, and I was able to get scholarships to go to University of Never, and I like was kind of in the top ranks of my school. And so looking back to knowing like how just like nervous I was and how perfect I wanted to be all the time, just telling myself not to be afraid of failure. Like that's part of the fun when you fail, and it helps you find who you are a lot faster when you realize even if you fail at something, it doesn't mean and that's the other thing, even if you fail at something, it doesn't mean you don't like it. And so I think not equating success to happiness and to fun was something I wish I could have learned much sooner, so that I didn't have this unnecessary pressure to be perfect all the time, but also to think that I liked something just because I was good at it. And so there was lots of things like when I started university, I was studying biology, for example, or I also like same thing with track. It's something that has that very, again, tunnel vision, narrow. You can be successful if you have this time and if you beat this many people. And so like kind of, I thought that I liked running for a long time, but actually I don't think I like it that much. I just like being outside. I much prefer like games like soccer and things. But I thought that I liked it because I was good at it. And so just kind of teaching myself that you're allowed to fail, and just because you fail doesn't mean you didn't enjoy failing, and doesn't mean you have to stop doing those things, I guess.
So interesting. Thank you. Yeah, no, you're so right. I think we like what did I wanted to say? Was so much in your stories. Like playing. Sometimes, we think we're meant to do something because we're good at this, and this is so sad. I think it happens with our studies also. Like I don't know. I was good in languages, and I ended up studying languages, and I'm like, well, good, but I need to do something else. So and then I studied international business, but I'm not really sure I like it. But you know, so it's amazing, like to see that. We don't need to put pressure on us. If this thing that if you don't really, it's not because you're good at it that you actually like it, and And yes, failure is part of the process, and I think it's hard to say this to like a young child. So, like if you could go back and say that to ourselves, like very young selves, I think that would actually help a lot. For like the teenage period and yes. So our last question would be like as an American and almost French person now, what message would you like to share to other women or people from gender minorities in the world, and also to our listeners in general?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's not always possible to find your entourage, to find your people, and it's one of the hardest things to create that boundary for yourself. But if you can, if you do have the liberty to make the choice, the people you surround yourselves with, I feel like it's the difference between night and day. And there are so many things that you can't choose, and depending on your situation, like that means literally nothing, where it's just you and yourself and your interior trying to make the best of a really horrible situation. But if you do have even a little bit of liberty, if there's one thing that you can change about your life, I would say change the people, which is hard because I feel like that's one of the hardest things to change, because I feel like you see people just based on your life, like who lives in your house and who you see at work, and sometimes that's literally all you have going on, and sometimes that even requires like changing a job or changing your apartment, and people don't always have the liberty to do that or the resources to do that. But if you can change one thing, change the people.
All right, well, thank you for these final words, and thank you so much for being my first interviewee ever.
Yes, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. I was honestly honored that I could support this podcast. I was so impressed just with your idea and the fact that you're like, yeah, a couple weeks ago I had this idea and like this is happening now. Like, I love that.
Thank you.
Incredible.
You're so cute. It was Sun Sister Podcast. Thank you for listening.